On the TNA side of things, I have to start off with the Beer Money Loser Leaves Town match against Eric Young and P.D. Williams. P.D. Williams ended up getting pinned and leaving the company. He's done with TNA, and frankly, I think that was a big mistake. P.D.'s not the biggest guy, but he does have a good look. I think the fans were behind him, and from what I've read and heard, he's the hardest working man on that show, and a lot of the talent backstage was very upset with P.D. Williams getting knocked off TNA. Now, I do believe TNA needs to trim some of the talent, because like I've said in previous shows, they have too much talent. They have a surplus, and it's holding back some people. But P.D. Williams was not one of the people that should have been trimmed. I think this was a big mistake, and just being a fan of wrestling, I hate to see the guy go. I liked watching him perform. I love seeing the Canadian Destroyer. I think that's a great finishing move, and frankly, I disagree with TNA on this move, and I think it was a mistake. The next major storyline in TNA right now is this feud that's ongoing between Sting and Kurt Angle, two major members of the Main Event Mafia, which I suppose threatens to disband the whole group. I don't know exactly where I see that going right now, because I think it would be stupid to disband the major heel group on the show. Although the TNA frontline seems to be faltering a little bit, so I could understand if they choose to do that. I know I've been down on Sting in the past about his matches, his performance, his age, and his ability. However, he and Kurt Angle had an empty arena match this past Thursday on Impact, and it was an amazing match. They did some great things in that match. I mean, Kurt Angle got thrown off the bleachers and fell like 15 feet to the floor. It was kind of dark, so I couldn't see if he landed on any kind of padding, but it was a great match. And the way they ended it, with the Main Event Mafia coming out, splitting them up, and then when they go to shake hands, Kurt Angle spits in Sting's face. This is building up to what's going to be a great match, Sting versus Kurt Angle at Destination X. In my opinion, Kurt Angle should win that match. He should become the heel champion of TNA, and Sting should switch back to being a face, because I think people prefer him as a face, and even though he's been trying to be a heel in the Main Event Mafia, I don't think he's really succeeded as being a heel. So that was a great match. I think the storyline's really interesting. I look forward to seeing where it goes, and I really hope to see Kurt Angle win the title at Destination X. Now, to get to some of your questions, and before I start with that, let me say this. If you send me a question, please enclose your name so that I can say who the question's from. I did get a couple of questions this week. I've chosen two of them that I'm going to do. This first one is from Sam, and his question was that the WWE Draft is coming up after WrestleMania in April. Who do I think should move to what shows? Now, I'm not going to give you a ton of moves, because that would take forever, but just some of the moves that I personally think should be made, and what I would do if I was running the show. I'd move Christian from ECW to SmackDown, because I think there's better competitors there for him to wrestle against. I'd move John Cena from Raw to SmackDown, just because if Triple H and Randy Orton are going to be competing for the world title, and John Cena is going to be competing for the title, you need to have a champion on SmackDown, and I think it would be better to have John Cena on SmackDown, because right now it's all about Orton and Triple H on Raw, and if he stays on Raw, he's going to have to kind of get shifted to a back burner position. I'd send JBL to SmackDown just because his storyline with Shawn Michaels is winding down. He's not going to go against The Undertaker at WrestleMania 25, and I think he's a better fit on SmackDown. He's a bit more of a slower competitor. He's not much of a talker, although some of his promos lately have been good. I'm not that big a fan of him. I'd move him down to a secondary show. And I would move Mickie James from Raw to SmackDown, just because when was the last time we really saw her do much of anything? I think she'd be better off training with some of the lesser-known divas right now, or the not as technically inclined divas, people like the Marias and the Michelle McCools. I think she'd work better out with them. I'd move Kane from Raw to ECW, because Kane did really well when he was in ECW, and he's not really getting great storylines on Raw. I think there's better people for him to compete against on ECW. I'd move Dolph Ziggler to ECW, because he's not getting much of a shot on Raw, and it's really not the best place to start out if you don't have the fans behind you. And I'd move Mike Knox to ECW, just because his storyline with Rey Mysterio is kind of winding down, although he did have a spot in the Elimination Chamber. The fans don't really seem to care about this guy. I think he'd be better off on ECW, where you could try and build him into something more, because right now it doesn't seem like anybody cares where he's going. There's no major storyline in the works for him. I think he'd be better off on a lower tier show with less pressure. When it comes to moving people to Raw, I would move Evan Bourne from ECW to Raw, just because Evan Bourne is very exciting, he's charismatic, the fans are into him, he's got some great moves, and they actually put him in a couple of matches on Raw here and there before his injury. It'll be interesting to see what happens when he comes back from his injury. I'd move Maurice from SmackDown to Raw. I think she's an exciting diva. I think she's a great competitor. I think she's got a great look, and I'd like to see her in matches against somebody like a Melina. I think those two could do some great work together, and I'd also like to see what she can do against a Beth Phoenix. I would move Jeff Hardy after the Matt Hardy-Jeff Hardy feud back to Raw. I think he was great on Raw. I loved when he was an Intercontinental Champion. This guy is an exciting performer, and I think Raw is the right spot for him. I think that's where he deserves to be. And frankly, I would move MVP to Raw. MVP is starting to get the fans behind him again, but there aren't too many people for him to greatly compete against, unless you're going to give him a run at the U.S. title and you're going to give it to him up against Shelton Benjamin. Then I would keep him on SmackDown if you're going to give him that title. But if he's not capturing that title, I think he should move to Raw. I think he's getting enough people behind him now. He's a good enough performer. He's exciting enough to watch. I would like to see him on Raw. This next question comes to me from a friend of mine named Dave. It was actually a conversation we were having about wrestling the other day, and he just kind of threw the question at me, and I decided it would be good to put on the show. With the WWE Hall of Fame induction ceremony coming up, who currently wrestling for the WWE do I see as future Hall of Famers? I don't see a lot, to be quite honest. I think in the past, to become a Hall of Famer, you had to do a lot more than you had to do these days. I think these days it's more about how the fans respond to you and pretty much how many runs you've had with the title, and if you had a match that people can't forget. The people that I would put into that group on Monday Night Raw would be Chris Jericho, first undisputed champion. There's no way you can't put this guy in the Hall of Fame. John Cena, whether or not I like him, the fans are behind this guy. He's done some great things, and I don't think anybody's going to forget him anytime soon. Shawn Michaels. Do I even need to tell you why Shawn Michaels needs to be in the Hall of Fame? Just look back at WrestleMania 10, and that's when he earned a spot in the Hall of Fame, and everything he's done since then has just been extra topping. Randy Orton, best heel going in WWE today. Great performer, great matches, really memorable stuff. His whole Legend Killer storyline, the storyline with Evolution, his runs against Triple H, his run against Batista. This guy is guaranteed a spot in the Hall of Fame as far as I'm concerned. And Rey Mysterio. I think Rey Mysterio deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame. This guy's a great competitor. He pulls off some crazy moves, and every time I see him in the ring, he does something I haven't seen him do before. Absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Rey Mysterio gets into the Hall of Fame. When it comes to SmackDown superstars who could possibly get into the Hall of Fame, Edge has to get into the Hall of Fame. He's done some great things. Just his participation in like the TLC matches this past Sunday, where he competed for the first time in 2 Elimination Chamber matches. He's been a great heel. He was a great face. He's done a lot of good things for the company. Obviously, they have a lot of faith in him with as many times as he's had the belt. I think he's guaranteed a spot in the Hall of Fame. Triple H, you don't even need to explain why. You just look at DX, you look at his title runs, and, whether or not this weighs in on it, his family, he's guaranteed a spot in the Hall of Fame. There's no doubt about it. The fans love this guy. He's one of the biggest names, if not the biggest name in the WWE right now. Undertaker, undefeated at WrestleMania. This guy's is 16-0 at WrestleMania. He is guaranteed a spot in the Hall of Fame. Frankly, this is one guy who he should be offered a spot in the Hall of Fame the minute he retires. He should be announced as a Hall of Famer. Now, the Hardy Boys. I think the Hardy Boys have potential to be in the Hall of Fame, and I think what's going to solidify their spot in the Hall of Fame is going to be their match at WrestleMania 25. I would think if there's any doubt that these two deserve a spot in the Hall of Fame, that doubt's going to be eradicated come WrestleMania 25. Finally, for ECW, the one guy on that show I believe deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame is Tommy Dreamer. Now, if you've only known Tommy Dreamer from watching him on the WWE version of ECW, then you probably won't understand why I'm going to say he deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame. But if you remember him from the original ECW days, this guy was a superstar. He was one of the biggest names in that company. To this day, when he comes out to the ring on ECW, the fans go crazy for him. I don't know why this guy hasn't been given more of a push or given a belt. I think it's really disrespectful the way they treat him in ECW, and frankly, I wouldn't blame him if he were to decide to retire after this year. Well, that about wraps it up for this edition of Unmarked Talk Wrestling. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to me. Like I said, I'd love to put them on the show. I appreciate those of you you have been commenting on the show. I appreciate those of you who are subscribing. I've had some interesting debates with some of you on a couple of my videos about my thoughts on some of the wrestlers, and I really like that. As long as you're leaving comments, even if you disagree with me, as long as you're not being blatantly being a dick about it, I'll have something to say. I'll respond to you, and I like the give and take of hearing what your thoughts are on some of the people that I've judged harshly and some of them that I've given a little too much attention to. But thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next week.